It's time to discuss one of the most important pieces of winning fantasy football every single year, and it's the waiver wire. And the beautiful thing about the waiver wire additions that you can make at this time of the year is that this is the time of the year that you can find some absolutely young studs to add on your roster that are just ready to break out. And we have got several rookies that look ready to pop off after week 2 fantasy football. So today we need to go over the top 6 must-add waiver wire targets before week 3 fantasy football. And at the end of the video, I'm also going to provide a list of guys that you could drop absolutely without any question in order to pick up these guys. So make sure to watch till the end. I will be up all night making sure this video gets out to you on time on Monday. So please make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already to show your support of the channel. So let's go ahead and get into our number 1 guy on the list. I think this is a great waiver wire addition right here, and it's Marvin Mims of the Denver Broncos, man. I love adding Marvin Mims in fantasy football after week 2 right here. So Marvin Mims is a guy that I actually said a lot of people should add him before week 1. He was actually my week 1 waiver wire additions video, and it didn't work out in week 1. Obviously, he was very much not involved in week 1. Week 2 was a different story though. Week 2, he had a very big game. And Marvin Mims, he only had a couple of targets in this game, but he capitalized on every single one of those targets in this particular game. He had a touchdown and over 100 yards on 2 receptions in this game. And it's not like you're adding him because he's going to be this big volume guy all of a sudden because, Cortland Sutton went down or Jerry Jeudy went down. That's not the point of this addition. The point of this addition right here is because when it comes to rookies in specific in fantasy football, if you have an opportunity to show the team what you have and you take advantage of it, that team is going to have a very hard time putting you back on the bench. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see here with Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims is already the wide receiver 3 on this roster. I mean, after KJ Hamler went down in the offseason and Tim Patrick, there was no question that Marvin Mims was going to be the guy who was in the slot a lot of the time for them. Marvin Mims proved a lot to Sean Payton this past week, and I think that he's only going to continue to get more involved for this particular Denver Broncos team. I love adding Marvin Mims this week. Our next waiver wire addition is going to be Zack Moss of the Indianapolis Colts. And who would have thought this one was going to be on here? I mean, I never would have thought that Zack Moss was really going to be a must-add guy. I mean, Zack Moss is a guy that I'm not wild on. And in my must-start or sit running backs video, I said he was a flex option. I hope you flexed him. Honestly, if you have him, I hope you played him because this dude had a touchdown in this game. He had 88 yards on the ground, averaging 4.9 yards per carry, and he had 4 receptions in this game as well. Showed some pass catching upside that is going to be important in this Indianapolis Colts offense. Now, the thing about this that makes it interesting to me is that Deion Jackson had every opportunity that Zack Moss had last week, and he did nothing with it. Well, Zack Moss, same offensive line, much better matchup for sure against the Houston Texans, but this is a guy I literally didn't think was very talented at all. Great week for Zack Moss in this particular matchup against the Houston Texans. I think that this is a situation where I'm not going to say it's going to carry over. I mean, we're talking about Zack Moss, and it does need to be remembered that he's not some stud at the running back position who's going to give you this lots of value. There's multiple reasons for that, and one of the main reasons for it is because this is a situation where you're getting Zack Moss, who's going to have probably a shorter shelf life because of Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is going to be back in this lineup probably as soon as week 5. So this is a very short-term rental here, but you're getting a running back 1 on a team. And this team doesn't have much interest in using multiple running backs. They want a running back 1. Deion Jackson was last week. Zack Moss is that guy this week. And also because this team is riddled with injuries at running back. I mean, they have so many injuries. Evan Hull's gone. Jonathan Taylor's gone. This is a situation where I think that Zack Moss definitely is going to hold some value moving forward because I do think that the opportunities will still be available for him. Moving on to our next guy, we've got Isaiah Hodgins here, wide receiver of the New York Giants. And after last week, here's what I said about the New York Giants wide receivers as a whole. What I said about the Giants wide receivers was that we're in a situation right now with these Giants wide receivers where they're coming off a massive beatdown from the Dallas Cowboys. And I can't tell anybody to pick up, let alone start, any Giants wide receivers. When there's a big blowout game like that, it's very hard to tell what the volume is going to be moving forward. And that's exactly what I needed to get solidified in week 2 versus the Arizona Cardinals. Isaiah Hodgins looks like this team's wide receiver 1 outside of Darren Waller. 4 catches for 40 yards and a touchdown this past week against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, this is a situation where I was expecting a lot more from the Giants, offensively and defensively against the Cardinals, but there's hope. And there's a lot of hope because Isaiah Hodgins is a wide receiver 1 who is on a lot of waiver wires in fantasy football right now. This is a guy that before the season started, I said, there's a good shot this guy could be a legitimate wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 in fantasy football. We're starting to see a little glimpse of that in week 2. Nothing special here. I mean, we're not talking about a 100-yard game with 2 touchdowns. This is not some spectacular game. But what it is it shows a glimpse into what Isaiah Hodgins could get with more targets from this Giants team. This is a guy that was very dominant in their playoff stretch last year, and they know that he's a very good player on this offense. They're going to continue to have him involved in this offense. I think this one, just from a consistency standpoint, is a very good waiver wire add before week 3 fantasy football. Moving on to our next waiver wire target before week 3 fantasy football, it's Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. Wide receiver, this guy, I said before the week, if Christian Watson sits, Jayden Reed is a legitimate flex option. And obviously Christian Watson is out, and that's a concern in and of itself. But that's a rabbit hole we won't go down today because we're addressing waiver wire targets right here. Jayden Reed, to me, is probably my favorite pickup of the week. And here's the reason why. So obviously, like we just discussed, Christian Watson may or may not come back in week 3. I mean, it's a concerning injury that he's had. He's missed 2 games to start the season already. That's a problem for sure. That's a concern that I have, and I think a lot of us have who drafted him. When is he going to come back? I don't know. But what I can tell you is this. When he does come back, I think Jayden Reed stays involved in this offense. Because what we saw in week 1 was Romeo Doubs is the wide receiver 1, right? And he obviously had the 2 touchdown game. I watched that game live, and he does not look comfortable in a wide receiver 1 role. Jayden Reed this week basically had the same stat line that Romeo Doubs had in week 1, and he looked way more comfortable doing it than Romeo Doubs did. 2 touchdowns, 4 receptions, 37 yards. This guy looked way more comfortable doing that than Romeo Doubs did in week 1. That's a key piece of this whole factor right here because he had 8 targets in this game, more targets than Romeo Doubs had. This is a situation where I think we could be looking at a breakout player who is going to be a very underdog type of guy that a lot of people are probably going to ignore because Christian Watson may be coming back in week 3. Do not ignore this one. This is my favorite waiver wire ad of the week, and it is because this guy has upside to give you these 20-point games like that. He's a very dynamic athlete. He scored very well in my rookie prospect model for wide receivers. I like Jayden Reed a lot. I think he's a great waiver wire add before week 3. Moving on to our next waiver wire edition, it is actually, speaking of Jordan Love, it's Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. Now, I'll come out right out and say it. I may have been wrong about Jordan Love. Before week 2, I said, this is a situation where I want to see him actually play a competitive game. And I want to see how he does there. Well, this week 2 game against Atlanta was very competitive. Green Bay ended up losing this game, but Jordan Love still ended up getting over 20 fantasy points in fantasy football this week. This guy legitimately is going to be a very good option. And this is all without not only Christian Watson, it was also without Aaron Jones. It was also without David Bakhtiari, a star tackle in this league. There's a lot of things to like about Jordan Love's situation, and I am concerned about a couple things. Like, his completion percentage has not been very good. 56% completion percentage in week 2. Like, this guy is not super accurate, super pinpoint, and I think when he does face a really tough defense and a really tough pass rush, that it's going to catch up to him. And I think that we're going to see worse weeks from Jordan Love. This is the type of guy, honestly, I would hold for quarterback leverage. If you're in a 1 quarterback league, this is the type of situation I would hold and probably use as trade leverage for someone who drafted, for example, Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, if that guy is desperate for a quarterback, this is a situation where I would pick Jordan Love off the waiver wire and use it to him and dangle it in front of him as trade bait. I would do the same thing for a guy who's got Justin Fields right now. Justin Fields has looked really bad to start the season again, and he's costing people a lot of fantasy weeks right now. this is the type of guy that he's on your waiver wire, and you are going to want to use that as trade leverage. And our last must-add waiver wire target before Week 3 fantasy football is Rasheed Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs, rostered in about 12% of ESPN leagues. So Rasheed Rice, I know that he's coming off a bad week, right? This is mainly an upside play because what I was looking for specifically when I was watching that Kansas City-Jacksonville game was how many guys were going to be involved as opposed to what they were last week and what their involvement was going to be compared to last week against the Detroit Lions in Week 1. The one guy that I think really maintained a lot of involvement was Rasheed Rice. I mean, you obviously had Sky Moore, who had the touchdown in this game, and he had a pretty good fantasy football output. Remember what he did in Week 1. He was nothing in Week 1. Kadarius Toney was much better as well. So he's not a consistent player either. Marquez Valdes-Scantling wasn't involved either, so he's very inconsistent. The one guy that I thought really was more involved than I thought he would be this week was Rasheed Rice. He only had 2 targets for 20 yards, but again, this is a situation where I think in Kansas City, amidst all of the moving parts on their wide receiver core specifically, we want to find a guy who is getting consistent work. And you can count on getting that consistent work on a week-to-week basis because obviously they're all on the same team. They all have super high upside from an offensive perspective being on the Kansas City Chiefs. So what we need to do then is we need to look for a guy who's going to be more consistent with the workload that he gets. I would not be surprised if Rasheed Rice is going to be a pretty decent model of consistency and starts getting like 4, 5, 6 targets a game in this offense. And 4 to 5 to 6 targets a game in an offense like this is not the same as an offense like Chicago's, an offense like the Houston Texans. They're much more higher quality targets in this offense. So I think that Rasheed Rice is actually a very good waiver wire pickup just from the aspect of upside. And the beauty is you can cut him if it doesn't work out. He's not going to take up a roster spot because you probably didn't even have to draft him in the first place. So now let's go on to our list of guys that I believe you need to drop in order to get these guys right here. So we've got Devon Achane. I think you can easily drop him. He hasn't been involved enough in the past 2 weeks at all. This is a guy that I don't think his upside is going to be anytime in the immediate future. We need to see more from a guy like Zach Charbonnet as well. Zach Charbonnet just is simply not involved. He's had like 8 carries the past 2 games. Very similar to Devon Achane, he needs to show a lot more for me to be able to even roster him on my fantasy team. Deion Jackson, Indianapolis Colts, it's over. Zack Moss just solidified his role as the starting running back in this backfield. Cam Akers, can we all admit that Cam Akers is done now? It's over. It's over for Cam Akers. Juju Smith-Schuster isn't even the wide receiver 1 on his own offense on a very expensive deal. It's embarrassing. You could drop Juju Smith-Schuster. Allen Lazard you could drop as well with the unfortunate situation with Aaron Rodgers. His upside as a wide receiver 2 just isn't that high. So let me know what guys you are actively targeting and dropping off of your team and picking up off waiver wires before Week 3 fantasy football. And if you want to see some buy low trade targets before Week 3 fantasy football, click on this video right here.